everybody. It's great to see you all here, and this is our first installment of the Talks at 12 series from the Bronx Center Center. So I hope you all will come back for subsequent ones. And but today we have a kind of special occasion. I think we have a whole team here rather than a single presenter, and to report on what seems like just a fascinating trip to Nicaragua. I'm going to introduce Paul Treadwell, actually, as some of you may know, and I'll let Paul introduce the other members of the team. Paul is a distance learning specialist within Cooperative Extension, but he also helps coordinate some of the intercultural exchanges that are going on with the extension. So within that context, I think he was one of the team leaders for this expedition to Nicaragua, and they've come back with lots of stories, I'm sure, and lots of good things and opportunities to talk about. So I'm going to turn it over to Paul, and he can introduce the other people in the team that are here.
Thank you very much. So we were a team, and we were a team of 8, plus 9, plus myself. We have some missing members today, so I'll start with them. Helene Dillard, the Director of Cooperative Extension, went on the trip with us. She's not here. We have a short clip of her that we'll play at the end. Chip Malone, who is a 4-H educator from Genesee County, was with us, but he is out ill. And Paul LaChapelle, who is a
community development specialist
from the University of Montana in Bozeman, was with us. So we were somewhat multi-state, if we can squeeze that in there. Sitting here to my left or right is Sean Smith from Cortland County. Rocky Combo, formerly from Schuyler County, but now with Schuyler County Planning Department. Mary Reggae from Oneida County. Did I get it right?
You did.
And Rod Howe from the Community and Regional Development Institute. And Nancy Schaff, who most of you know, I assume, from 4-H here in the Bronx Renner Center. This was our team. We went down and we spent 9 days, although at times it seemed like weeks, in Nicaragua. And we're going to spend the next approximately half hour going through our little presentation. There's basically context, encounters, and reflections on the experiences we had there. And then we'd like to have at least 15 or 20 minutes for discussion, questions, things like that. So we're going to kick it off right now, and we're going to talk a little bit about the context of why Nicaragua and why is this important. A year ago, Rod and I got together and we put together a small proposal on cross-cultural learning and engagement for Extension because we thought this was a field that we should be emphasizing a little bit more. We presented the proposal to Helene Dillard, our director, and it was subsequently funded for 2 years. So part of that proposal included international exchange experiences. Now, funding for the international exchange experience, unfortunately, cannot come from any of the federal funds we have. So this trip was done in collaboration with ESP, which is the Epsilon Sigma Phi is the Extension Professionals fraternity. So funds were made available through ESP to help subsidize people's trips, and then otherwise everybody else chipped in their own money. We had a combination of people who had to take vacation time to engage in this experience. So it was a real mixture of how we came up with our funding and time to do this. We have some existing and emerging relationships in Nicaragua that we wanted to reinforce and build. I have been going to Nicaragua for the past 6 years or so. I've been leading groups of students to San Ramon in Nicaragua, and I thought it would be a great place for us to start out as our first international experience. Again, we had the support from ESP, which was fundamental to getting this first trip off the ground. And, you know, the University in Cal is prioritizing international work and experience, and this sort of lines up very nicely with that whole movement towards why do we connect internationally, what does it mean to live in a global world, and how can we be better global citizens. And the benefits, we can probably zoom through some of these. We all are pretty familiar with this. We can increase understanding of connectedness and commonalities of issues in a globalizing world. And that's one thing we saw over and over again when we were traveling through Nicaragua was the context might be different, but the problems, the situations being faced are very similar. There are connections that just run across any border or boundary you can have, and being able to understand that and internalize that understanding is fundamentally important to survive these days, I think. It can bring back renewed energy and reinvigorate practices at home. And we have networks. You know, now we are all, the group of us, the 9 of us, we are communicating as a group, sharing experiences that otherwise would not have come about had we not done this rather intense trip. We set out with some trip goals. We wanted to have first experience of how rural outreach and extension agencies in a foreign culture addressed issues similar to those here in New York State. We wanted to meet colleagues in Nicaragua. Some of the colleagues we met in Nicaragua were from my network of folks that I've worked with. A couple of them, and our connection to the University in Leon was through a colleague that Rod had who has worked in Nicaragua, but he was unable to attend this trip. He graciously turned over his contacts, and so we built some new connections at the university through those contacts. It was a very generous sharing of contact information, and it's leading to some things coming up in the future. And we wanted the multidisciplinary CCE educator team, which I think we ended up with, except for Rocky, who's left us. So the brigade, we introduced ourselves. Here's a picture of everybody on the final day in San Ramon with their homestay families. We'll talk about the homestay experience scattered throughout this. And now we're going to move on to some specific encounters we had during our 9 days in Nicaragua. And in San Ramon, we did have homestays, so everybody in the group lived with a Nicaraguan family for, was it 3 days? 3 days, which, depending on who you talk to, is either not quite enough or way more than enough. The reality of life in Nicaragua is best experienced in a homestay. There was a hotel in San Ramon that we could have stayed at, but it would have segregated us from the people, and the experience you get with having functional showers and clean restroom facilities is not the same experience you get when you're living with a family. So the homestay experience, I think, is one of the fundamental things that I try to do when I'm leading a trip, is to make sure that people can experience the community from the level of the folks actually living in it. And 3 days is probably just enough to give you a glimpse into what family life is like. San Ramon is a great location for bringing gringos down and having them stay in homes. For over a decade now, the Homestay Family Network has been in place. They are a network. They're the homestay mothers, if you will. They meet periodically. They ensure that there are at least minimal standards. They provide bottled water, fresh, purified water for everybody. Everybody has mosquito netting. So it is a good place to introduce the group to day-to-day life in Nicaragua. And now, of course, after that 3-day intense experience, we went to hotels. And
because we were sick.
People seem to appreciate that experience.
He was planning on it. It was fabulous.
Well, one thing, if you've only been to Nicaragua a couple times, or if it's your first time, one thing that's guaranteed to happen is somewhere along the first few days, except in Rod's case, it held off a little bit, your stomach will start feeling a little bit unsettled, I guess is one way of saying it. And charcoal can take care of some of that, but it really does become a presence that you live with. It's just part of adapting to the new environment. It's an experience. So we're going to talk about encounters we had with the cooperative of cooperatives, with a finca, a coffee plantation, a youth development organization, CESESMA, the women of Lapita who make paper, the women of El Chile who weave, and the library in La Chispa. I think that's what we're going to do. Let's see what happens. San Ramon is situated in the heart of coffee growing region of Nicaragua, and it is also home to a number of other agricultural producers. So there is a union of cooperatives. The UCA is the Union of Cooperative Agriculturalists. We met with folks at the UCA, and we got to see while we were there a theater performance. There was just a new piece of legislation was passed by the government making it illegal to basically abuse women. And the UCA is made up of 28 or 32 cooperatives, and they're responsible for training cooperative members in the implications of the new law. The cooperative members then go back to their cooperative and train their members. So there's a real interesting filtering down of information, and it was really great to see theater being used. It's a tradition in Latin America in popular education to use many different forms to engage your audience and your learners. Theater is one of the strong ones, and so we got to experience some of that. They also have a radio station, and radio is also a very effective way of reaching people. It's a technology we don't think much about here, but radio as a form of communication technology is fairly important in reaching folks who don't have access to computers, who often don't have access to electricity, but might have a battery-powered radio. And a lot of the cell phones in Nicaragua also come with built-in FM radios. So if you have a cell phone, you can actually listen to radio. Rod, is there anything I'm missing here?
My T-shirt.
Oh, Rod's T-shirt. Rod has a T-shirt.
And you have somewhere that says on the back?
Who's good with Spanish here? Yeah. Well, this is a T-shirt they had for a campaign that basically denounced violence against women. So they try in many different ways to get out the message, and we could spend a whole couple hours talking about violence against women and the problem of women in socioeconomic development in Nicaragua, but we won't go into it right now. But if you'd like to at some point, I'd love to have coffee. So that was one of the morning's encounters, and while we were part of our group, we split up into two groups at that point. Community development folks and myself went to the UCA, and the youth development folks, which would be Nancy and Sean and Chip, went to visit CESESMA. And
I'll talk about CESESMA. So CESESMA is the Center for Education and Health and Environment. It's an independent nonprofit association that was first formed around 1996. They formed really to look at children's needs, particularly in relation to the fact that you're in a coffee growing area, and many of the children then end up working in the coffee plantations. They forego school, and they put in lots of hours, so they don't have some of the basic things that we have, like play. That's not something that they typically would have. So in fact, I brought this to show you. One of the CESESMA initiatives was defending play, and this was, I'll pass this around so you can see some of the kids saying, you know, here's how we play, and instead of just working. So our time there really focused on one of the newer initiatives, which was learning to live without violence. So it crossed over, you know, violence against women, but also violence against children. So CESESMA overall looks at a couple of key issues, and you can see how I laid them out here. So I know the program planning and evaluation, I know you guys will be very familiar with this layout. It should look familiar. We have education, children's rights, gender equality, nonviolence, child labor, the environment, and community health. So those are some of the areas that CESESMA is trying to make an impact in. Their strategic objective is to strengthen the participation of organizations of children and young people, enabling them to act in local and national decision-making forums. One of the ways that they go about doing that is creating what they call promotoras and promotoros. Those are kids that actually train kids. So very much like our 4-H model, where you have the kids who learn the information, and then they go back to their communities and they teach the other kids what they've just learned. And the idea is that they would learn how to live with greater self-esteem, living without violence, integrating opportunities for education, and being able to stand up for their own rights. We did spend a good amount of time really talking about crossovers. So areas that, you know, here in the U.S. right now we just had more shootings, right? So some of these areas, violence against children and violence within families, are, you know, cross over those cultural boundaries. So we talked about really needing to look at bullying in the schools, how to address child abuse, and how to work with violence against women.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, go ahead, Nancy.
Well, one of the things that struck me when we were talking to them was how similar what they were doing was to 4-H, although we would probably say that what they're doing is a deficit approach because they were looking at a problem and trying to address it. But they really were doing positive youth development. I mean, they wouldn't have called it that, but they were, because they had all these kids that they would pick projects they were interested in, they would form groups, they would teach it to other kids, and there was a deliberate ladder that these kids would work their way up to. Then the idea was then they would become involved in community and government, and so it was really fascinating because there really were a lot of similarities.
And they have worked with some of the other entities, like in England, to do some impact evaluations. So I brought this along as well, which was an evaluation they did back in 2000 looking at what they're doing.
And then Sean, there's some other materials that I brought if you want to just pass around.
Yeah, okay. So some of the other
Most of them are in
things,
Spanish, but.
this is the curriculum that they developed, they were sharing with us. Aprender a vida violencia, am I pronouncing that right? Anyway, learning to live without violence. So you can see that this is being translated to English by the same group in England, but it's not available yet. So just in Spanish right now. One about sexuality, and, addressing dating violence, date rape, those kind of things. One on just the kids, and I'll pass this around. This is more in Spanish, which I'm okay in Spanish, but not great. I actually speak Italian better, so. And then.
Nope, don't jump ahead.
Don't jump ahead. Okay, that's it.
No, that's from Leon.
What about this one?
You can ignore that one for now.
So,
just to sort of, as part of the contextualization process, when we talked about we spent a couple minutes talking about UCA, that is a Nicaraguan organization that was formed by Nicaraguans. CESESMA was actually started by an Englishman named Harry Shearer, who is very involved in right-to-play issues around the world. Harry started the organization over a decade or so ago, and he has stepped away, turned control over to Nicaraguans, and it is now very much a Nicaraguan organization. But it's a model that in San Ramon especially is a hub for a lot of NGOs working, and it's a model that's not uncommon. You will have somebody going down to start a project. Once they get the wheels spinning, they will step away, turn it over to Nicaraguans, and it becomes very much a Nicaraguan organization. So it was an interesting sort of model for development, I think, if you want to look at it that way.
Which is, I'll just say, which is really common for Extension. We do that same kind of work out in our communities. We often get the projects going and then turn them over to other entities to keep that going, but we get the initiative, get the ball rolling.
Okay, well, now we're going to cut out a bunch of stuff and move to Leon, because Nancy's telling me to go faster. I thought I was talking awfully damn fast in the first place. So we spent 3 nights in San Ramon, and then we traveled off to Leon for 3 nights. Our initial plans had us going to visit a Cornell University student project, a site of one of their projects, but I flew down a week ahead of time to plan for the event, and in that interim between my planning for the event and people showing up, there was some gunfire exchange between police and protesters that basically closed the one main road into the village we wanted to visit, so I'm not taking a bunch of my Extension colleagues to any place where there's going to be any kind of gunfire.
And my director of Extension.
Well, yes, especially. Had Helene not been there, perhaps we would have gone, and we'd have different stories to tell, but this is the story we have. Another thing about traveling, and I don't know, has anybody here been to Nicaragua? It's not uncommon. Yeah, so we have some folks who've been there. My experience with Nicaragua and my experience with trying to coordinate a group on the ground in an environment like that is you have to be very flexible. Plans change at the drop of a hat. The truck suddenly won't start, so you can't go visit this, so you have to do that. In the week leading up to their visit, besides the gunfire, we had a volcano that erupted on the southern end of Nicaragua that was spewing out huge things of plumes of smoke. And then on the day the plane was flying in, there were some minor earthquakes in Managua where the plane was flying in, and it was really kind of nail-biting waiting for everybody to get there. So we spent 3 days. We spent 1 night in Managua, and then we spent 3 days in San Ramon, and we moved to Leon for 3 days instead of the original 2, but the 3-day expansion was a positive thing. It gave us more time to spend with folks at the university there. So in Leon, we connected with UNAN Leon, the National Autonomous University of Nicaragua in Leon. We went to Pueblo Redondo, which is a small community just outside of Leon, visited an iguana nursery, and I didn't include any of those pictures, and a women's development project. We met Tito Anton, who used to be with the Department of Agroecology at UNAN, but he's since left and is starting up a sustainable farm project. We visited the colleges of agroecology, veterinary medicine, and the botanical garden. And I worked with a man called Marvin down there, and I met Marvin a year ago last January and said, Marvin, I'd like to bring a group down, maybe visit 1 or 2 projects. Then the week before the group got there, I went and visited Marvin and said, visited 1 or 2 projects. And in the interim between that conversation and the time the group got here, Marvin sent me this schedule that was literally 15-minute increments of we're going to go here, we're going to do this. And they were like really jazzed about us visiting, so it was a great experience. But there was one day where it was just, I don't know, I thought it was maybe a little too much, but it was very exciting anyways. So I'm going to let Rod talk about Pueblo Redondo.
I'm going to get out from under your act there, Paul. So one of the things that was striking to me, by the way, this is the day that I wasn't feeling well, so I'm going to ask my colleagues to chime in on what they remember about this visit. But it was striking to me because it was very similar to how we approach rural community and economic development here in New York State, partly because of the involvement of University of Leon and the role that they played in terms of being a catalyst, a facilitator. They weren't there. They didn't go out to say, this is a group of women, by the way, that we met with. Everyone is so gracious throughout the trip. And this is just a partial shot of, I think we met with maybe 10 to 12 women, just sat around underneath some trees that day. It was a really, really, really hot day. They did bring out rocking chairs. I mean, we were very comfortable. But the women told their stories. What was interesting about this is there was one man who also was part of the circle. He ended up doing a fair amount of talking. So part of the context was, especially when you're talking about women's economic development, they were really exploring what some entrepreneurial opportunities were. Sometimes there's been instances where the men have been threatened when the women start to bring in some money to the household. So it was a little awkward to try to get this man to stop talking so we could hear from the women. So we tried to steer the conversation back to hear their stories, and we're somewhat successful in that. But again, it was really building from their assets. It was working with them to identify what the strategies might be for moving ahead on entrepreneurial development. What are their skill sets? What are the marketing opportunities? So it was a long-term, it is a long-term initiative. So there were many, many similarities to how our extension associations work with communities and bring faculty into that equation. In much of the work, when I go out to work with rural communities, they want to know, just tell us what the answer is. It doesn't work that way, and that's very much here too. It's sort of a trial and error. Let's try something. Let's see if it works. There's no magic bullets. It's people coming together, coming up with some strategies and trying them out. So I was really, I could see opportunities for future trips where students and educators and faculty would get involved with this project. Again, to highlight some things that we're trying to do here in New York State and strategies that have worked. But University of Leon is very interested in collaborations. So it would be interesting for us to figure out, with all of the challenges, how you start fostering some conversation between groups like this and groups here in New York State of women or other rural economic development initiatives. So since I was somewhat out of it that day, anything that you want to chime in on?
One of the coordinators I spoke with this project said that, initially she tried to get things going and, wasn't quite as welcomed to begin with. And part of it was need-based. So back in the day when they first started that conversation, they had enough land and produce that they were doing okay. But now this small community has grown, and so they still are trying to feed their families on the same amount of land. So a lot of the issues around that became, well, okay, then we need to know how to make our land yield more so that we can feed our families and hopefully have money left over to sell something at the market. So that changed the conversation, and so they were much more open, and again, it did have to do with getting through some of the more male dominated kind of cultural barriers that said, no, we can take care of our own, we don't need your help. But then as that shifted to say, oh, well, I guess we do need to learn something else because we have so many more people now to feed than we had to begin with. So she said that after several attempts, the doors finally came open, and it was a trust-building process.
By the way, there's one, you can see a boy in the background. We were awestruck by the children of Nicaragua. We had We took so many pictures of the children in Nicaragua, so we were very struck by that.
Well, and the children were always around when we did things, and they were so well behaved. That's what struck me, was that they were able to be around, be a part of it, but they weren't bugging adults. They weren't demanding attention. They were very sort of self-possessed and able to entertain themselves and find things to play with, simple things. And there was, I just kept saying, there seemed to be a very sweet innocence to the children, the most of the children we met.
So, I can't remember which day, it might have been the same day. We were at Pueblo Redondo. We visited in the morning. Yeah, in the morning we visited a farm. Tito Anton was the director of Department of Agroecology at UNAN Leon. There was some politics involved, and he got pushed out. But he's off trying to develop his own sustainable farm as a model farm to start bringing. He's talking about bringing street kids out to the farm to teach them how to engage in agricultural activities again. So somebody's going to talk about Tito.
Tito was just a really cool guy. I mean, he just was so energetic and just so giving with his time and his stories. And his daughter, Lilium, was a translator for us, so that helped immensely since I have no Spanish. But the one part that I was struck by, my background is more agriculture and renewable energy, as well as trying to blend those that information to the adult population, but also probably in some ways that I work, I like to work with the youth in order to get to my adults. But one thing that I was struck with as it relates to the work that I do in New York is that for so many farmers and growers that may be really tentative about going into different forms of energy, either production or conservation, is that they're really looking for someone else. Have they done it first? And it comes down to money. So if it turns out to be an economic benefit for them, and they can look to see what other people have already done as a case study, they're more likely to, take it on. Tito, on the other hand, is one of those guys that goes in, he follows his passion and developed this farm. And it was intended to be a sustainable operation, but he's employed different mechanisms. For example, the solar panels here and the water are used to generate electricity so that he can irrigate. Then he also had some other micro burners as we walked in that they were using for cooking. So a lot of his practice was really geared toward being able to be sustainable. And Rocky's going to sort of mention, the community aspect of that. But again, he's following a vision and a passion with an intent to have this model grow.
So when you think about community development, I'm planning department in Schuyler County. I was formerly director of planning community development with CCE. But when you think about community development, it's more than just bricks and mortar. Okay, it's more than just buildings. It's about bringing in people, working together with those bricks and mortar. Well, Tito's case was just fantastic. I mean, when I went there, I was just so amazed by it. In the bottom left-hand corner, you'll see only a portion of his farm. Now, basically what he had was 1 acre of intensely farmed land that he said that a family of 4 could live off of for an entire year. Now, they don't have something that's called winter that we have here, but that's not to say that we can't have the same kind of thinking. Okay, we can have greenhouses, we can, apply different things here in the state. But again, the fact that he was intensively farming this land sustainably as well, I mean, that's something that we can clearly do something here. Paul mentioned the whole thing about bringing in the youth. Again, now you're doing that capacity building for your community. Now you're getting your youth engaged in something that you can do and build at your local level. Now, in upstate New York, we're primarily rural. I'm in Schuyler County, we're primarily rural. Well, again, another takeaway from this is that you have 1 acre of land. Now, the other thing I should mention, too, is to the right and left of that 1 acre is land that he farmed and said that he could go to a farmer's market and sell that produce, and that family could then supplement their income. Well, these are the kind of things that we should be thinking about here in New York State. Instead of importing our food from, so on and so forth, wherever, we can grow a lot of that stuff here, and we should be thinking in the same ways that they're thinking. They're not likely importing stuff, into Nicaragua.
Well, they can't afford it.
Well, exactly. They're working with what they have. Well, yes, we can necessarily afford it, but that doesn't mean that we can't also grow it here. So, there's a number of other things I could easily speak to, but the big takeaway from this simple case study is that, community development is just more than just those buildings. It's more than just the plants on the ground, right? It's about mixing that together with your people, to create really a viable community.
The other part, too, is that he was really interested in a certain youth population, and that was one that was youth at risk, or not at risk, in trouble. And so those were his target youth that he was trying to bring back and say, you can have a productive life. Get them off the street. They're doing drugs. Let's get them over here. It might be a little bit, safer, cleaner environment where they can have that sense of productivity and to give back. So it's a great model.
Yeah. And Tito's farm was a chance for Helene to get all excited because she found some leaf mold that was apparently very fascinating and just really one of the most wonderful things that she experienced, I think, was finding that. Puzzled me, but hey, that's okay. After that day of exciting adventures, we spent the next day on campus at the university at the veterinary campus, and we met with some faculty folks there. We started out with a very large meeting with a bunch of people sitting around the table. And again, for those of you who have had experience in Nicaragua, you may resonate with this. We're going to meet at 8 o'clock. Well, we show up at 8 o'clock, and 8 o'clock is really somewhere between 8 and 9:30. And so expectations are a little bit different. So people drifted in during the first meeting. We're sitting in the hard chairs, but there was air conditioning, so it was very nice. But we met with a bunch of faculty and researchers there, and we got to visit some of the labs, and the facilities are quite striking in their austerity, I think is one way of saying it. Nicaragua is the second poorest country in the region. Haiti is the first. And back before the earthquake, Haiti and Nicaragua used to trade that back and forth, but the earthquake pretty much ensured Haiti stays at the bottom for a while. They don't have vast economic resources. They don't have large companies that are funding their research facilities. So they're working pretty much bare bones with what they have, and what maybe the Japanese government might kick in a small subsidy of $100,000 to help equip the campus. The thing that I took away from this, and I'm not a lab kind of person, was the tremendous energy and dedication that they brought to their work, and the fact that they were actually innovating and doing things for the people of Nicaragua with what they had to work with. There was nothing stopping them. They were not going to be held back by the fact that they couldn't buy the latest, greatest piece of technology. They had a problem. They were looking at it. They were figuring out how they could address it with what they had available. It was a fascinating experience. And, yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Anybody else want to?
Yeah, I stayed for later on in the afternoon, and you guys tried to meet with the mayor, I think, right?
Yeah. Our side adventure.
We went to what they call the vet school, and it was maybe one room, a couple of rooms. Their operating room was one small room. It was very run down. I mean, you're used to Cornell Vet School, and you're like the latest and the greatest. It was one stainless steel table with a few straps, but these guys had vision. They said, we're going to have an animal hospital, and they will have that. But it was just so striking, the difference and what we take for granted here. I mean, we have everything. And as a side, to come home, I have two daughters, and they were getting ready for school. That when I had gotten back and I was still sick, but that's another story. They were complaining about going to school, and it's a perfect opportunity for a parent to say, I don't want to hear about it. You know how lucky you are. And not only that, I thought, this is great. You go, and you're not even pregnant. And they said, oh my God, don't send my mother out of the country again. But what happens is, what we learn too is that over 50% of these girls, 11, 12, 13, 14, are pregnant and single moms. And, for them to get that message, they're like, we haven't talked about it since, We will. But, it's all of those different dynamics that we bring back to live our lives, and even the kind of coffee we drink now,
Do we have a slide just on the plant doctor?
No, we didn't go into, Eileen's not here, so we didn't go into plant
Maybe I can just share a couple words, because I found that really
We're running out of time. And
I'll be quick. But this is really cool, because it's like the epitome of extension. So what would happen is the folks out in the community who are growing things, if they found something wrong with their plants and they didn't know what it was and they couldn't figure it out, they would call the plant doctor, who is somebody at the university, who would actually literally go out on a bicycle, because you couldn't drive to some of the places, take the books with them on the bike and look it up to try to figure out what the problem was. And if they couldn't, then they would take a sample back to the university to try to diagnose what that problem was to help that farmer. So I was just like, wow, talk about innovation. We're not going to even let the fact that there's no road stop us. We're going to take a bike and get out there and meet those people. So that was really, when you say passionate, that was like the perfect example of passionate.
And that was the day we had the 2-hour lunch. Marvin generously gave us a 2-hour lunch break, so we went to this restaurant, and we were lucky to have finished our lunch in 2 hours. They had like one person working behind it. It was really exciting. And then there was our mini adventure, but we won't talk about that because we don't have time. Nancy's going to talk about 4S.
Yeah, one more reflection on the university visit was that I was just struck by the emphasis on sustainable farming, and just it was just amazing. Part of it was just they couldn't afford all this fancy fertilizer, but just that, how resourceful they were and how serious they were about researching different ways of doing biological controls and all kinds of stuff. It was really fascinating. We went down for professional development, but I also went with sort of a program development aim too, and I went as far as youth development and 4-H. So I was looking for opportunities of ways that we could maybe hook up our 4-H members that live in New York with kids who live in Nicaragua so they could learn about each other's lives. And the two most sort of fruitful connections were both, one was just completely serendipitous, and the other one happened like a couple days before we left. And so those turned out to be really great. So there is an active 4S program in Costa Rica and other places. So in Latin America, it's 4S because of Saber, Sentimientos, Servicio, and Salud is their head, heart, health, hands, and health. So they're in the process. I connected with some people through the National 4-H Council, and then they connected me with somebody at the USDA Foreign Ag Service right before we left. And they are working with some people in Nicaragua trying to start 4S back up. At some point, there was a 4S program, and it's kind of fallen by the wayside. And so so I got in touch with this guy, and this top picture, the guy closest to us in the white shirt, his name is Kevin Marinacci, and he is the head of the Fabreto Foundation in Nicaragua. And he's right now they're letting him take some, they do feeding programs. The USDA funds some feeding programs. They're allowing him to take some of the funding he had and use that to start up 4S clubs. He has some schools and centers that he works with. So school is just starting up now. This is the beginning of their school year. So he's getting ready to start groups and charter them starting right about now. So we've stayed in touch with him. At the time we were there, at that meeting, there were also two colleagues from the University of Wisconsin Extension Service that were there working with Kevin. And since then, I've also found that somebody from Minnesota Extension is also working in Nicaragua. So we're trying to make all these connections. So that was great to meet Kevin. So we're trying to just sort of stay in touch and see how we might be able to help him. And then the other thing that happened that was just completely serendipitous was when we went to Naragote to meet with Sosanitza, we met a Peace Corps volunteer named Cynthia Herrera. She's from Southern California. And I just, I sort of gave her all the stuff I had left that I wanted to give away and gave her my card and said, can I contact you? And didn't get too much of a chance to talk to her too much there. She had some, she said there were 250 Peace Corps volunteers in Nicaragua, and they're kind of just put there and they have to come up with some kind of project. So I've been in contact with her since I came back, and she has gotten very excited. She said they're having some problems with morale. A lot of the volunteers have come back to the States. And so she's working right now with about 10 other volunteers, and she wants to devote the rest of her time in Nicaragua to starting youth groups modeled on 4-H. So I've gotten her in touch with Kevin to see if she can work into what he's doing, and then what I'm trying to do is recruit people like our collegiate 4-H members and 4-H clubs and some of our alumni to kind of serve as virtual mentors for them. So we're going to try to hook people up. Hopefully they can share projects, things they're doing. When I went down, I took the Seed to Salad project, the garden-based learning project that's in Spanish, and the Laboratory of Ornithology is also working on a Latin American bird sleuth project. So I took that down in Spanish. So trying to find some common projects, because birds, you can watch birds anywhere, it doesn't take resources. Planting things doesn't take a lot of resources, you can do that. So I thought if kids were doing similar projects, then they could maybe compare notes and send pictures back and forth. So this slide, I just learned about this last week, so I'm in no way an expert on this, but I just thought this was fascinating. This is Jennifer Souza, how do you pronounce her name, do you know? From Minnesota. So I was on a webinar, and she was talking about how in different cultures people think about learning in different ways. And in 4-H, we always talk about experiential learning. We're talking a lot about inquiry learning now. So there's a lot of focus on doing. It's always been a big focus in 4-H on doing. And so she was explaining that in other cultures, they might have a different take on this. So this seemed like a really, really important thing to pay attention to when you're working with other people, that the focus might be in different places and that you need to be aware of that and honor that they may, that the way we do it might not be the way that would work best for them. So so she had this slide. This is what any of us in 4-H are very familiar with, this experiential learning cycle. And we always, where the number one is, we always start with the experience. I mean, that's just automatic. So it's really hard for me to even think about that you could start anywhere else on the cycle. But if you click it again, the numbers should disappear. So she was saying, in another place, if that might not be number one. That might not be where you start, which is, it's even hard for me to even think about. So, the focus might not be as much on the doing as on the sharing or process or something else. So that was just a really interesting thing to think about.
Okay, so now we're going to wind it up and leave about 2 minutes for conversation with some reflections. We did a post-trip sort of evaluation, and these are just some comments. And there are some handouts there if people want to take copies of this. I'm not going to read them out loud. We want to get to Helene, who could not be here. Helene could not be here, but she is here virtually, if I can get things to click the way they're supposed to. That bar really is quite annoying.
I know, sure too.
Yeah, I'm surprised. Where did she go? Let's see.
This particular trip was the inaugural trip for the group. And what it did was it helped us lay the foundations for the next visits that we would like to try to do. But what we could see were some real opportunities for our educators, extension educators, to go overseas, to be in communities that really are starving for non-formal extension education, and think of things that we do, that they do, and think of collaborations that we could work together on. There were some real opportunities there around youth, some real opportunities around community development. There's always opportunities around agriculture development. And there were just so many little things that we all came away with that we thought, boy, it would be great if. But I think even more so, it helps our educators see the real world in a different context. When you're just in America, our issues might be, my grant got cut by $10,000, where the issue there might be, we need $10 to do X. The scale difference was quite striking to me, but also the abilities that we have and the things that we had here that we could share and come up with synergistic ideas that could work there was just really, really eye-opening. And I think that for all of us, it was just a great trip to see where and how to connect with people in another place. The Internet makes a huge difference. We've all been able to stay in contact with at least one person, thinking about some collaborative projects, some student exchanges, some extension exchanges that we all could benefit from. So I think this was a really good start. I know that we want to continue the program. We're trying to find some external funding sources to help us with that. And we found a community of students and other faculty on campus, as well as extension educators, who are raring to go. So I know this is going to be a really good cross-cultural exchange, a really good opportunity for all of us.
So there, we just had to get Helene in. And now we have, what's next, but we can just sort of talk about what's next. Helene mentioned subsequent trips. We are starting to plan for our August sort of work and learning exchange. There are some brochures up there if you'd like to pick up a copy of that. In June, we're hoping to bring up one of the Nicaraguans we worked with. Michael is he's 22, he just had his birthday last week. 22-year-old Nicaraguan. He was a university student. He's since graduated and working for a not-for-profit down there. We're hoping to bring him up and introduce him to 4-H, shuttle him around the state a little bit so he can experience 4-H in diverse contexts, and then send him back so he can start working on the ground in the San Ramon, Matagalpa region. We're also talking about how could we bring somebody like Tito up. I think for him, if we could bring him up for a week, it would be a great exchange and experience. So we're pursuing those as we go along. We're also looking at instituting within New York State a series of sort of cross-county exchanges, because we do have tremendous diversity here in New York State, and we want to start working with that and exposing educators from different areas to the cultural diversity that's present in our programming and also our communities in the state. With that being said, why don't we just take questions now for the last few minutes, if there are any.
I have a comment and a question. One thing is that there have been various people who've done projects in Nicaragua over the years, and one thing that happens at Cornell is we lose the thread. We used to have a very active integrated pest management project in coffee and in cotton, and so it'd be great if this team had any energy to kind of pull together some of the other things that we've already put together in the past. And then the other thing is, my suggestion, I would really like to see if there's this cross-county, experiment. I would love to see people go into some of the farm worker camps to see what happens to people who are from Latin America who come here and work in agriculture and really experience that which exists in Schuyler County and Tompkins County and Cortland County and Cayuga County. So that's something that I would really like to be built if there's for some of the future plans.
Okay.
And we have had at least one meeting that Richard Kiley helped put together from Engaged Learning and Research, because there are a number of initiatives at Cornell that touch with Nicaragua. So we have started that discussion of, well, let's learn from one another, let's see how we can maybe connect some of those initiatives together. So we are starting that process.
No, nothing else? I can talk for 5 more minutes, that's no problem.
I was curious when you stay in people's homes,
are
they compensated for that?
Yes. Yeah, so you are essentially, and they're compensated to the tune of like $17 a day, and that includes your meals for the day and, if you're there long enough, you get laundry done and things like that. But yeah, it does represent a source of income for the families. And I think Rod and I stayed in the nicest homestay because I shared my homestay family with Rod. The experience ranges from somewhat uncomfortable to more uncomfortable.
Can you tell us what it is like? Because I have picturing things in my mind, but I'm not.
Well,
what did you sleep on?
Oh, there was nice. We have our family now, Rod. They actually built an addition on their house. They've been doing it for long enough where they'd saved up money to build the addition on their house. So there was a very nice brick addition with a double mattress for me. Did you have a double or a single?
This is double.
It was double. They also have, in the storeroom back there, they also have bunk beds so that when, depending on who's coming to stay, they can reconfigure the rooms because it is a tremendous source of income. You get up in the morning and there's breakfast, and generally it's eggs and rice and beans, gallo pinto, which is standard pretty much 24/7 in Nicaragua. Then you head off and you do a little thing, and if you're going to be gone for the day, your host mom, or in this case my host sister, she's old enough, she can't be my mom, would pack you a lunch. So often you'll have a nice little Tupperware container with a packed lunch, and then you come back and there's dinner, and then San Ramon generally shuts down at around 9:30 at night, so the doors are locked and everybody goes to bed. And then you're woken at 4 or 5 in the morning by the roosters who start, and then the dogs will start barking at the roosters, and you can hear it echoing throughout the community, and then everybody
starts at 3 in the morning.
I think the funniest stories, though, were all the bathroom stories. Everybody had a bathroom story about showering out of cups and.
Well,
I'll just share my home experience. And the lady who hosted me was fabulous, and she had an assistant that helped her because she worked during the day, and somebody had to be there to take care of her daughter. But I would say the whole home was no bigger than this one room. The dividers were really probably old sheets that divided the spaces so that you would have a bedroom and then another bedroom and a bathroom. And, the bathrooms tend to be very small. I'm not the thinnest person, and I would have to, go in sideways and, be very graceful, yes. And, you have a curtain there. The shower, there's no hot water. They would hook up the hose, and that would go to the sink, which was outdoors for the kitchen, and if you needed it inside, you'd rearrange the hose, and it would be up on top, and that was your shower. And it was cold. So the little things that we just take for granted, I think. Now, at the same time, it's kind of interesting because they did have a television, no hot water. They had cell phones, but, and also interesting thing is that the roofs were on top of the structure so that there was no, it's not like this where you have a sealed space, so you actually hear more of the outside, I think, because it was open. So it was more like it just kind of sat on top of the building. And so, you'd hear sometimes birds and little, critters would come and join you, and they're like, oh, hi. So it was interesting. But, when you're living there, you realize that this is just the way it is, and you make do with what you have. And, I think they were very generous, but I think I was particularly surprised. I mean, the little things like the hot water. I mean, we were like, we got to share a room in the hotel, with each other, and we're like, woo, you should shower first. So it's those little things that you really kind of go, wow,
I mean, one of the things I'll say is, of course we joke about all these little things. Like in the grand scheme of things, it was just for fun, really. The people there are just unbelievable. They really open arms. When they welcome you into their homes, you really feel part of the family. The facilities, honestly, it's not even a big deal. The biggest thing I can say is I highly recommend this for anybody and everybody. It's not only a great professional development kind of thing, but just to kind of go to a different world and see how things are done differently. It's just a wonderful experience. So
and to be able to spend time with colleagues, that kind of time is really valuable.
Yes, and we were all in one bus, so we would have lively conversations.
Kind of like summer camp.
Friendships you'll never forget.
Oh.
So if the program is able to continue, how do you envision the participation from CCE? Are you a team that will go again and again, or are you looking to engage?
We can't afford to go again and again. That's the problem. What we're looking for right now is funding would be nice, a source of funding, but then interested educators who want to pair with students and hopefully some faculty connection to go down. The August trip, we're planning an 11-day trip. We're expanding it by 2 days. We're dropping a 5-day sort of work and research period in the middle of that. So the group will go down, spend 3 days together in San Ramon because you need that togetherness to build the group foundation. And then we'll send people off in teams to work. Now, hopefully the teams will also include Nicaraguan faculty and students as well, because to me it's really important that we're bringing each other along during the process. So we've identified some research areas. So they'll go off. Some will go to some will stay in San Ramon. Some will go to Leon. Some might go to Nagarote. A couple other locations where we're safe sending people to conduct small research projects, looking at women's economic development, looking at my mind just blanked, but a number of other issues. Youth development, yeah. And then come back together at the end. So we're open to taking anybody. The cost is, we try to keep the cost as affordable as possible. It still ends up costing about $1,200 plus airfare. There's just no way around it. By the time you figure transportation in country, homestays, hotels, all the logistics, and then you have to pitch in a little for the folks you're working with, it comes out to about that, which is still not unreasonable when you look at some of the other experiences that are being offered. I work with a not-for-profit that's based in Vermont. They've been working in Nicaragua for 12 years now. So we hired their bus and their driver and one of their staff members, Michael, as a matter of fact, to accompany us during the whole journey. So we had consistent, reliable transportation. We had a bus driver that I live in his house, so I know Alvaro. I trust him. We can depend on him. To me, when we're going to places like Nicaragua, it's fundamentally important that you have that network of trust you can rely on, because it can get sketchy. I mean, there are places where it can get a little bit sketchy, and you want to avoid those. You want to go where everybody's going to have a good, genuine, authentic experience, but also be safe. So we're open to taking anybody who's interested, and it would really be nice to have the multi-state collaborations. It would be nice to ramp that up a little bit more. But yeah, the diversity of projects that could be undertaken is pretty much limitless. And finding collaborators in Nicaragua, if they know that there's somebody from Cornell or an American university that wants to work with them, they'll rise to the surface really rapidly.
Through Epsilon Sigma Phi, which is a national organization, we're trying to keep word out about these trips so that hopefully we will occasionally have folks from other states. Paul has also taken the lead on developing some journal articles that we're submitting, not only to the Journal of Extension, but I think also to, you mentioned something else. So
Agricultural and Extension Education International.
There's another question.
Yes.
Was it your impression that people did or did not have, or somewhere in between, their basic needs met, meaning food, shelter, clothing, transportation, a job?
Water. Well, as soon as you travel outside of San Ramon, and even within San Ramon, you'll find this. As soon as you travel outside of San Ramon, the access to those sorts of things plummets. So there is intense poverty. You can encounter very easily intense poverty by walking 20 minutes outside of San Ramon. Not enough food, no electricity, lack of potable water. In El Chile, which we didn't talk about, which is what... So we're running over time.
Okay. Wait, I don't know if Derek looked at one of the brochures about the kids who are staying in school. In the list of things they said they wanted was latrines for boys and girls. They wanted water, so they didn't have to bring water in the school, so they didn't have to bring water from home. They wanted windows in the school. So, I mean, it would be really neat to translate that for the 4-H project, to look at, here are the priorities they're saying. A separate latrine for boys and girls, water, floor, they actually have floors in there.
Yeah.
And that the teachers wouldn't go away for 2 hours and not tell them where they were.
Wow.
So I mean, it'd be very eye-opening just to, and it's short, it's very brief, that one,
So I mean, there is intense poverty that you experience, and we didn't brush up against that too much, because I didn't send people into that. Although in Pueblo Redondo, if you walked away from where those women were sitting in the chairs, you could find it right there. It's tremendously heartbreaking in many ways, but the thing that I always leave with every time I leave from Nicaragua is the tremendous resilience and spirit, and the belief that we didn't talk about any of the history and the fact that, there was the revolution, and most of you, well, probably 50-50. Some of you might remember the revolution, some of you obviously are a little younger. But there is still, in so many places, that spirit is still present, that yes, we can shape the world to be a better place. And it's that fundamental thing that we seem to have lost so much here in the United States of America, is we as human beings can actually shape the world that we live in. And that's alive there, even for a family that has nothing, that has a dirt floor, that has an outside latrine, that may have to walk a mile to get potable water. They still believe that the world can be a better place. And that, we can dress the why we take people down there up in all the jargon and all the academic language we need to, but it's that fundamental thing. If you connect on that level and come back with that feeling that the world is shapeable, that we can make change, then I've done what I hope to do as someone leading a trip anywhere. Is I've helped clear some of the muck away from our eyes. But anyways, I get all...
Don't get him started.
I wanted to share one example of something very concrete that I've changed in my lifestyle. That's coffee that I drink. We visited these women who started a paper company because they weren't making enough to make ends meet picking coffee. So a coffee bean is about this big, and so they would pick 6 pounds of coffee and get 40 cents. And you think about that, that's not a lot of money. So what they did to basically look at that and address it was start their own recycled paper business. But the important, I hear fair trade a lot, but I don't really know it. There I experienced it.
Some of the paper
and
wants to see what the ladies made.
So Green Mountain Coffee is a really strong initiative for not only giving a price, fair wage, but also for supplementing education into the coffee cooperative that we went into and helping that whole culture and environment. So, you know, to really bring that story back to my home and to share it with many people that I interact with, that's something really concrete that can help change.
And I don't know, do we need to vacate the room?
We probably need to wrap up, yeah.
Okay.
Things are happening.
Because there are tremendous...
If people need to leave, you should probably
Yeah,
go. But if you can hang around a little bit,
yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to stay for
if anybody wants to
We
kind of...
brought some of the other items that we bought from the women's cooperatives. If anyone else wants to take a look at anything up on the table.
But why not anybody else that wants to continue?
Which they made.
Yeah,
Stay around.
yeah. So if you want to hang out and talk for a little longer, we can certainly do that. If
But
not,
thank you.
well, it was great. Thank you very much.